Hey everyone, welcome to Building Better Games. Today I'm talking to Richard Dansky from the narrative side of game development. We're going to be diving into some of the myths and misunderstandings, as well as what does it mean to do a good job in narrative? What does it mean to work with narrative well? Richard, anything you want to say to introduce yourself, give anybody background on you, just a short blurb, 60-second sell, whatever you want to call it.
My name is Richard Dansky. I've been working in video games narrative for 27 years. I spent 23 years as the central Clancy writer for Ubisoft. I've also worked in franchises such as Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, Might and Magic, and numerous others. And I recently received the first ever Lifetime Achievement Award for game writing from the IGDA Game Writer SIG.
So I recently released a podcast episode. I was talking about a few disciplines that I think people see as easy because it seems like what they do isn't that complicated. And I named design, narrative, and production as 3 examples. And what surprised me in the comments was actually that I got very little pushback around design, a little bit around production, narrative, man. People came out of the woodwork at me about narrative. And it was almost, how dare you claim that narrative is an essential game development discipline? You can make a great game and narrative can be an afterthought. But it was interesting because I did engage in some dialogue and people were pretty firm on the perspective. You've been in narrative for 27 years. I guarantee you've seen this from inside of companies, from outside of companies, from players, from investors, for whatever. What comes up for you is I just say narrative was the biggest, I don't know, what would you call it, spark that lit the flame, right?
It is an age-old thing, and it is something that I have seen internally, externally, with fans, with fellow devs, with other, because it is not a well-understood discipline, and it came later to the party than other disciplines, I think. When it was everybody in a garage, or even, the first studios, the writing was handed off to the designers because designers made things made of words, and so did writers.
Yeah.
And so it was not recognized, realized its own thing until much later, and everybody else was already established, and the cool kids had made their friendships, and who's the weird new kid who just showed up. And so it doesn't have the cachet of having been there from the beginning. It's the new kid on the block. And also, it's something that's very hard to quantify what you're doing. Engineering, a feature works or a feature doesn't work. Art, the model looks like the character it's supposed to be, or it doesn't. Writing, there is no absolute yes, no, this is it, this is not it, because it's in many ways a matter of taste. And also, everybody thinks they can write. And that is not the case, because you can make a grilled cheese sandwich does not make you a cordon bleu chef. Because you can type an email does not make you a professional quality writer. Just people don't understand that there is a difference between what they're doing and professional quality and doing professional grade work that needs to be supported and iterated on and made to be as good as the other elements of the game. But out of all that comes just these fundamental misunderstandings over what narrative is, what game writing is, how they function, what their benefit is. And there's a lot of resistance to learning that because, people have had these ideas for a very long time and they don't want to be told that they're wrong. They don't want to admit the mistake necessarily. And so they will get kind of salty on the pushback because they don't want to think that, no, maybe that's not the case.
Yeah. Well, and that was the most common was anybody can do narratives and afterthought. The second most common one was modern narrative is terrible. It used to be so good, and now it's garbage and trash. What do you have to say? What are your I'm trying to attack you? What comes to mind for you when someone says that?
Though they remind me really of the old timey baseball fans. Or back in the day, all of our players are great, and all the hitters were Hank Aaron, and all the pitchers were Sandy Koufax. And no, that was not the case. It's just those are the only 2 we remember. Hank Aaron did not hit all his home runs off Sandy Koufax. Sandy Koufax did not get all his strikeouts off Hank Aaron. There are a whole lot of other guys who are good and less good and kind of terrible playing at the time. The thing is, you don't remember them anymore. They have faded with time. All that remains in memory are the shining elite examples. And so they're carrying forward these few shining elite examples and comparing it to everything that's happening today. And naturally, that's not a fair comparison.
Right. Yeah.
And so and also, these are the games people played maybe as teenagers, and they have the most emotional commitment to, most attachment. And so nothing is ever going to be as good as the first love, so to speak. But
Yeah.
it is incontrovertible that game narrative is better now. Game writing is better now. We have had decades of building and building and building, iterating, learning and learning and learning to do our craft better. Our tools are better. We have more resources available. We have learned from those who have gone before us, and we are doing better work on average. And we are making great games. And is every game great with narrative? No, but it never was. When someone compares Final Fantasy VII to like a farming simulator in terms of narrative, they're kind of putting their thumb on the scales there a little bit. And again, I'm not going to say every game is perfect and every game is great narrative. And that is sort of the place a lot of people jump to if you defend modern narrative. Oh, you're saying they're all great. No, it's a range. But there's a whole lot of stuff at the upper end of that range. And I say the middle of that range has moved towards the good side as we have gotten better and better and learned from past iterations.
Yeah. And there's almost an effect of you take for granted, like when graphical fidelity started getting better, you then started taking it for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that same thing of like, if narrative is on average better, you don't notice it anymore. And if you actually go back and play some of those old games, sure, there are some that remain as shining examples of like, this was really done right.
Mm-hmm.
But, if you're picking at someone's, NPC barks or something, like, go back and listen to some of the old NPC barks. I mean, Skyrim is actually an interesting example of this because they have some great lines that all became memes. But when you actually hear them, it's like, there's nothing really amazing about this. It just happened to be the line, right? And then it became famous. I used to be an adventurer like you until I took an arrow in the knee and stuff like that. And was this a brilliantly written line? Well, actually, the line doesn't make that much sense, especially with how much they put it in the game, that you can basically get every guard in the whole world to say it. But it became funny because perhaps the expectation was lower. And now I think that idea of, like you said, not everything is going to hit the A+, and also the A+ today is significantly better than the A+ 20 years ago. And I do look at games. Like I'm always interested when someone says that, and I go like, have you played Baldur's Gate 3?
Mm-hmm.
Have you played like Dispatch?
Mm-hmm.
Have you played even like Helldivers 2? I mean, that is a narratively brilliant game.
Absolutely.
In my opinion. But and so we have these examples of like this going really well.
Blueprints is a puzzle game with a magnificent narrative structure underpinning it. And you don't look at a puzzle game and think great narrative necessarily, or we haven't in the past, but it's a perfect example of how it's done and how the new approaches and the new thoughts and the new ways of making games and the new technologies let us put narrative in a space where maybe it wasn't expected before and make it prominent in a space it wasn't expected before. And I will also say that so many people mistake dialogue or plot for narrative, and they think it's a one-to-one correlation, and that is absolutely not the case. Narrative is the context for everything you do in a game. It is the world. It is the space you are moving in, who you are, why you are doing it. And sometimes that gets expressed through a million lines of dialogue, and sometimes that gets expressed through a piece of graffiti on a wall. And there are so many ways narrative manifests, both from a writing team and also in collaborating with art, audio, everybody else, that people don't realize are narrative.
Let's talk more about that. So broaden out the definition of narrative for the people that do find it to be, it's just plot, it's just story, it's just lines, it's dialogue, it's whatever, it's somebody writing who the character is, but like in terms of what they're going to say, like how do you think of narrative?
On the most basic level, narrative is the context for the gameplay. It is the setting. It is the idiom for everything. It is the rationale. It explains who the characters are and why they are in this world, what the enemy is and why they're in the world, what tools you have, why they're in the world, things like that. It's not just the story. Let's take Minecraft as an example. Start with Minecraft. Perfect. It's a sandbox. There's no narrative, except what tools do you get at the very start of the game? What do you start working with? You're not getting a Black & Decker multi-tool. You're not getting a chainsaw. You're not getting a laser saw. You are getting the most basic medieval hand tools. That is setting the framework for your experience in that game. That functionally is a base narrative. And I'm not saying that, it's overwhelming narrative. I certainly am not saying, and have never said narrative should always drive the train. I'm saying that narrative informs this other stuff and allows its expression and growth through other people's creativity as well.
Mm-hmm. One, to kind of put a spin on that too, Subnautica 2 has a very different base set of things.
Mm-hmm.
Because from that perspective, it lives in a different world. And so the things you're going to start thinking about and collecting and whatever, while there might be some Venn diagram overlap, it's broadly different because here I'm underwater interacting with sea creatures. And here I'm in this quasi-medieval Lego game, right? Like attempting to, build myself a house.
Exactly. And over here, I am an elite special forces agent. And so the tools I'm presented with are high-powered rifles and scopes and things like that. And those are narrative elements. You say underwater, all of a sudden, you're mandating a whole bunch of stuff, whether it's scuba gear, diving gear, or things that will work underwater. And hey, no fire because we're underwater. And that's actually narrative. It's not explicit narrative. It's not storytelling. But it's narrative. And I'm not trying to claim all the territory for narrative. I'm saying narrative is something that informs stuff and then lets it go forth.
So let me again, I'll devil's advocate here. Okay, but I look at Minecraft, I look at Subnautica. If I didn't have a dedicated narrative person on the Minecraft team when they were building it, which there might not have been, I don't know. Seems like something the designers were able to do. Seems like something somebody else was able to figure out. Why do we need this? Like, isn't this something that, again, coming back to the initial sort of conceit you talked about, this is something designers do, and which, narrative is somebody who's actually thinking about this as sort of their job. Like, do we really need that?
Okay. And what you've actually gotten at there is this sort of sneaky absolutism that gets brought up as an argument in a lot of ways, because there is this belief that narrative means all the narrative. And that's absolutely not the case. I firmly believe that every game has an appropriate amount of narrative. Sometimes it's this much. Sometimes it's just a little Russian dude who comes out and dances in between levels. Sometimes it's Baldur's Gate 3. There is an appropriate level. And sometimes that mandates a team. Sometimes that mandates an individual. Sometimes that mandates a contractor who's on the game for 3 months. Sometimes it's 3 tasks that the designer has to do to set everybody else up to run. And again, there's all these straw men that constantly get set up so people can try to knock them down. And it's just not the case. Narrative is an element, and you scale your team, your resource, your time, everything else appropriately to how much narrative makes your game better.
Right. Well, it is funny too, because if you run the clock back far enough, every discipline that's not an engineer is an addition to what was originally there, right? Because it was originally engineers making the ASCII art, and it was engineers who did the design, and it was just groups of engineers, and they could have been very elitist about how, like, all we need are engineers because engineers can do all the other functions to a sufficient level. And also, to your point, as the tools improved, as the technology got better, and as we learned more, we realized that just because you have 3 engineers doesn't mean that they are going to make good design decisions, or just because you have 10 engineers doesn't mean you have anybody who's going to be able to think about color theory and art, and again, to story and these sorts of elements.
Exactly. Let people do what they do well. Don't ask them to do what they don't do well. Recognize expertise in specific areas that you need, and put that to use to make your game better.
Yeah. Let's go a level down, because we gave that high level. I'd almost say it's like the context in which everything else makes sense, right? Like it. Break that down into more of the subcomponents, right? Okay, what is like? Let's say you were a game that needed a decent amount of narrative, and you were trying to figure out, is this a contractor for 3 months? Is this like what are the things that you might be looking at as like, well, what elements are we talking about here? What comes to mind for you as you like subdivide that broad? Does this sound familiar? You're in a leadership role at a game studio. Everyone is busy working. No one has any time. But the actual game itself isn't in a good spot. Maybe it's the tech. Maybe it's the lack of a validated prototype. Maybe it's that every person seems to have a different idea about what we're trying to build. But you've got a job. There are reports to send, meetings to schedule and facilitate, the occasional season of performance reviews to go through. And everyone is always so busy. When you step back, it makes you wonder if everyone is just going to keep slowly walking towards the abyss until the project or game fails. Is this what it means to be a leader in games? In tech? To endlessly repeat the same sequence of meetings without really moving the needle? To spend hours trying to get Jira tickets and dashboards where they should be? To pretend that everything is fine when you know deep down it really isn't? It doesn't have to be this way. You can make a difference. You can help your team and game succeed, but sometimes you need a bit of help to get there. I've started a game dev leadership accelerator. It aims to level up leaders who see opportunities to make a difference but don't know how to capitalize on them. We'll walk through what it means to lead well and give you tools to understand your organization's challenges and implement changes to overcome them. Game dev is hard. Knowing how to lead will give you an edge. It will still be hard, but you'll be ready to tackle it. If you're interested, let me know below. Hit the link. I hope to see you in the accelerator because I believe better leaders will help teams make better games, and I look forward to someday playing what you create.
What you want to do, obviously, is figure out what you want of the game in terms of features. And then you can scope the content to those features. Do we have spoken dialogue? Yes, no. That's a really big decision. Do we have systemic dialogue for enemies? Okay, if we do, then we have to build that system. And there's, a lot of engineering and design that goes into that and things like that. So you don't say, okay, we have this much a narrative. We're going to grab this person for a year. You look at what it's actually going to need and you invest the appropriate resources to make it happen the same way you would do with art assets, the same way you would do with engineering tasks. And I would sit down first and say, okay, what narrative features do we want? And, after everybody had finished having the heart attack over the words narrative features, maybe systems is a better word, I know, but okay, if we want barks, we need a systemic dialogue system, and that's going to, come from narrative, but it's also going to have a lot of interaction with engineering to determine which stimuli and how often they fire off and what happens if they fire off on top of one another, and awareness states and when do they trigger, things like that. And you need narrative design to figure out what it's going to be. Or more accurately, how it's going to work. And then you hire the writer saying, okay, we've got 20 guards and there's per level and there's 10 different levels in 4 different settings. And we've got 200 stimuli and they each need 10 variants. And you do the math and it adds up very quickly. And that means a bunch of writers. But at the same time, you don't pull it out of the air. You plan it the same way you plan everything else. And you support it appropriately.
Break that into segments. We talked about writing there. We talked about narrative design. We talked earlier about the idea of world building, or at least awareness of the broader space. Like, how do you subdivide this? Again, if someone was like, Richard, I'm building a game. I need to know how much narrative, right? I need, what would be the questions you would ask?
Okay. So there's different elements to narrative, and the boundaries between them are a little fluid and not well understood. I have been on projects where all the writers were called narrative designers. I have been on projects where all the narrative designers were called writers, and that's a fundamental misunderstanding there. Well, the way I break it down from my experience is narrative designers are the folks who design and implement the systems and build the devices to get the narrative to the player and do the implementation to get it to the player. They are the ones who make it go.
Okay.
The writers are the ones who create the content that gets fed into that system.
Okay.
Narrative designers.
Okay, so again, I would just to make this with an example. So we said, yes, we want NPCs to have barks. We want NPCs to speak dialogue at certain times to us. We need, like, a narrative designer might be involved in the, okay, cool, under what circumstances, at what distance, what are the conditions under which, and basically working with the engineers around things like stimuli, or working with designers around how does this impact gameplay? Okay, cool. Here's what I brought. And then you say, okay, cool. Now that we understand that system, we maybe got some test ones in there that have shown that it kind of works. Writers we need, again, like you said, it just explodes so fast, but like we need thousands potentially of lines for different characters and different contexts. And now we got to go figure out voicing and blah, 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 like all that. But so that's writer and narrative design, right?
Yeah,
Those
exactly.
two. It could be one example of them interacting.
Yes, that's a perfect example. Narrative designer says, okay, we're doing the system. Let me talk to engineering about, which stimuli we want to record. Let me talk to combat gameplay, or combat design about which stimuli they want recorded. Let's talk about detection, which ones they want to have listed. And so they build that system in conjunction with those other folks. And then the giant spreadsheet from hell gets created, and it's time to write the barks. And yeah, I could tell you how many barks have been on some of the games I've worked on, but you wouldn't believe me.
No. Give me give me the high number. What's the high number?
135,000.
Wow. My goodness.
Well, that game was a special case, but it was special on, yeah. It had multiple settings, and it had guards, and it also had civilians, and it had multiple types of civilians, and civilians had different stimuli from the guards, and it just, every time I turned around, it's like, 10,000 more lines. And
it's multiplicative. And I bet, even though 135,000, I bet there's games out there with more.
Oh, I have no
doubt. And yet that's still, like, I think part of my production brain, I immediately started going like, how many of those per hour, like how many, like what's sort of the breakdown? And like my part of me was like, let's make this spreadsheet to try to figure out, right, like at what rate and how many, people doing the writing do I need to get to the end point? And it's like, that's going to be a lot more than you think.
Yep. And yeah, I've been on bark duty on games before, and there are ways to, shall we say, even the odds a little bit, and there's places where you can reuse, but if I may go off on a small rant here, barks are fundamentally the most important bit of game writing to get exposed to the player, because you will hear them so often and coming from so many mouths. And they have to be informative, because a bark exists to notify the player of the change of state in the game that they have to act upon. They need to be in character. They need to be well written, but also not memorable, because if they're memorable and you hear them 200 times, then all of a sudden it's nails on a chalkboard, and
right.
And you also need,
or you're the meme of I took an arrow to the knee.
Oh yeah, and yeah, that it can happen with a good one. If it's it's a bad one. Oh God, yeah. I mean, I was the lead writer on The Division, and oh God, they shot Alex, and yeah, and thank God the fans were in on the joke. And so Alex became a running gag. And I think in The Division 2, we actually had a cinematic where you had two guards talking. Yeah, they got Alex. Yeah, he was a great guy. Wait, I thought Alex was a woman. And because, it's a gender neutral name. Yeah. And so, we were able to run with that joke. But other times they are not that kind. And I will point back in my personal history to the original Far Cry, where I was brought in as a script doctor and a rewrite specialist. And I focused foolishly on the main storyline and didn't give the barks the attention they deserved. And so I'm going to shoot you in the face slip through. And that was maybe okay for one guy, but when 12 different guys on 12 different islands are all shouting it, it's arrow in the knee territory before arrow in the knee.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so funny that you bring that up, because how easy is it for me, even as a producer in the industry, to think, I know the barks are going to take time, but they're not that big a deal.
Mm-hmm.
Versus what you just said, which again makes much more sense, which is actually the barks are a huge deal. Actually, the single lines of dialogue that like do this or do that, or they are what, even if they're not necessarily change of state, you're just walking through some random city and somebody says something, but it creates a tone for this whole city. That could be right or wrong. Like you said, it could stick in someone's mind in the wrong way, right? Like, so I'm trying to hit this place where it's not too memorable, but like, and that isn't that kind of weird, right? Like, don't make it too good, because then it will be bad.
Exactly.
And like, I hadn't thought about it that way. So anyway, thank you.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
for teaching me. And also I think the fact that when you were doing Far Cry, you had that own version of it yourself, where you were like, I focused more on the main story because I thought that was where the money was, and it turned out, because I didn't spend enough time on Barks, they actually were the thing that came back.
Mhm.
And, people to this day probably remember, I'm going to shoot you in the face, right?
Mhm.
Like more people might remember that than remember what the main story was and all of its details.
I would not be surprised at all. I will own that. That was my mistake. I made it. I learned from it. I try and communicate it now to, younger writers whom I mentor, talk to. But yeah, wow, that was a learning experience.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we've talked about narrative design. We talked about writing. Are these the big two? If not, what else goes alongside them? And again, recognizing that we're not dealing with perfectly clear differentiations or some standard that everybody in the industry would agree with.
You would probably want to have a lead for each of those groups, obviously.
Okay.
And above them, you'll want to have a narrative director.
Mm-hmm.
And the narrative director owns all the narrative stuff, the design side, the content side, all of it, and is the final arbiter in terms of what comes out of that group and goes to the rest of the team. And that is the role that I have largely filled over the last few years. And it's an interesting change of focus because, again, you're not getting your hands dirty unless something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. But it is very much about putting people in the right place to do the right thing, being the vision holder for narrative to speak to the rest of team leadership and to studio management as necessary, saying, hey, we need these things if we're going to achieve what you want us to achieve. And at the same time, communicating the needs of the rest of the team down to the writers and the narrative designers.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also throw localization potentially in there, simply because loc obviously involves the scripts, the texts. And so even if, your narrative team should not be doing localization, but your narrative team should be engaging with localization and preparing the scripts for localization and engaging with localization. So if localization has questions, answering them, things like that. And in a larger sense, narrative needs to be talking to everybody. Part of it is to make sure that there's consistency between what is written and what is built. And part of that is simply to make sure that everybody's moving in the same direction, that there's a shared understanding of what's happening in the game.
Mm-hmm. Again, because that we're establishing core context for everything so that it makes sense for the player as they're going through it. And I mean, let's just say that make sense is the bottom, that's sort of the bare minimum, where ideally this is actually in itself engaging and compelling and things like that.
Yeah. And on the positive side, hey, narrative goes and talks to character art about here's what we're doing with character backstories, and character art gets excited and comes back to narrative. Hey, we want to do these things to the visuals. Can you work that into the backstory? And you get better content and more tightly bound content. And it's great. On the downside, narrative goes to talk to level design, and oops, somebody didn't tell narrative that, half this level got chopped out and now there's a giant octopus in the middle of it. And maybe we should have some dialogue about that. And I'm not saying that's happened to me, but that certainly happened to me.
Okay. So we've got narrative design, we've got writing, we've got leads, we've got a narrative director. Anything else? Like you said, we interact heavily with Loc, obviously. And there's going to be links to, design and production on sort of timelines, QA, there's going to be links all throughout. Any other things, any other disciplines you consider core, or would we have to subdivide further to get into additional stuff?
I think we'd subdivide further. And I'm going to make the case now actually for editing as something that we should have more of in games. If you're going to have that much content that's made of words, it's really useful to have someone who is not invested in those words to look over those words and make sure they are all grammatical and spelled correctly and consistent. Yeah. You've got continuity, consistency in there. And that's, a position that I've seen teams absolutely rebel against, because what do they do? But they provide something really valuable.
As the number of lines, and I'll come back to, again, the game that doesn't need narrative, League of Legends, it's actually quite a bit of massive amounts of narrative in that. We had copy editors who were working with the champion team, and they would help go through, to your point, and the narratives on the team did not seem at all annoyed that they were there and actually found them quite useful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've never met a narrative professional whom I wanted to work with who was against editors. Most of them rightfully understand, no, they are there to help. A writer who does not want an editor is not a writer that you want to work with, frankly.
We've talked a lot about what narrative disciplines there are, where they fit. We talked a little bit about misunderstandings, which is narrative as afterthought, narrative as coming in at the last minute just to make sure the story's polished.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry, we've already got everything figured out. You just need to add some stuff, like add some flavor and make it the world or whatever. Like make it narratively good.
Mm-hmm.
How often does that happen now? Versus, I don't know, 20 years ago. And like, what are the downsides of that? Like, I'll just yank a narrative in late and give them a few months to do the polishy things.
Months? You're being generous.
What's the shortest amount of time you've had?
We're going into the studio Thursday. Could you write the game?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, that was years ago. It was a much smaller game, but yes, it was literally, we're going to the studio Thursday. Can you write the game? Then that was followed by the way, can you go to LA? So
did you take it?
I paid for the Wi-Fi and wrote on the plane, but yeah, no, there's resistance in the team a lot of times from folks who don't understand narrative. And part of that is that there's this notion of narrative and particularly writers as being, separate from the team, and they want separate treatment and special treatment, and they live in their little dark cave and occasionally slide pages out, and they don't want to listen to anybody, and they want to tell everybody else what to do. And all of that is nonsense. That's not the way professional game writers work, and it hasn't been really for as long as they've been out there. Anybody who is good at this professionally does not hide, does not silo, wants interaction, because if you don't talk to level design, you don't know what the level looks like now, and you can't write the most accurate stuff you want. You can for it. If you don't know how the mission has changed, you can't adjust your dialogue. If you don't know what objectives are going to be over here, you can't set them up with dialogue over here. So there's this notion that writers just want to tell everybody what to do from their hidden place, and that's completely incorrect, but it's been so ingrained, and it's been repeated by people who are not writers and not narrative, back and forth around, round, that it's really hard to dislodge sometimes. I will tell you a story. One game I was working on, the art director had requested some descriptions for something from a writer, and the writer turned in something, and the art director didn't like all of it. And he looks at me and says, yeah, I'll just rewrite this. And I said, or you could provide feedback to the writer, and they can do a second draft, and we'll iterate on that the same way your team iterates on their models. And then next time, he'll know what you want better, and the next deliverable will be even better. And he looked like I'd hit him on the back of the head with a pole arm, because it had literally never occurred to him that that was how narrative could work. And so you get that. You get the notion that writing is easy because, it doesn't have a tool like, a specific tool you have to learn or a specific language you have to learn. You get the sense, that it's easy because people type emails all the time. You get people who have the sense that it should be perfect first pass because it's just words, right? And who don't understand that this stuff needs polish and iteration the same way everything else does. You need to get your words up against the play experience, up against the player, see what works, what doesn't, and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. Mm-hmm. And all of that is completely alien to so many of the devs I've worked with over the years. Now, thankfully, it's getting better. And let me be clear, I'm not blaming these people. I don't think they're bad people. I don't think they're, they were out to get me or anything else like that. They had never been exposed to the truth. They didn't have that context. They didn't have that understanding. And so part of my job became educating them as to how we could work better together.
Mm-hmm. That seems like, again, in our previous conversations, has been a decent part of your job, has been doing some amount of education over the value that you bring.
Yes, very much so. And narrative, again, doesn't have a clear dollar in, dollar out model that you can potentially see from other stuff. And because of that, it gets devalued a lot of times. But really, narrative is in many ways the engine that drives so much else. And as I said to you, nobody has ever cosplayed as a game mechanic.
Right.
But
Right,
characters are functionally an aspect of narrative. And so narrative is there to build identification with characters in the game. It's there to build anticipation of what's coming next. It's there to build investment in what's going on in the world, so people want more of it. And it's there to build anticipation. And you know, it's there to get people attached to the world, so they want what comes next. And that then turns into, I'm buying the next DLC. That comes into, I'm buying these new character skins. That turns into, I'm wearing the t-shirt. And maybe that's not a direct line from, I spent $1 for this writer to, you know, write these 3 lines, but ultimately it does come back and it sustains in a way that is many ways faster and more flexible than maybe making some other pieces of content.
Just to poke at that with some examples, that idea of having a character, having a character where the lines, the narrative, the discussion, with the artists, the designers, whoever else around who this character is and what they're doing in the context of the world. I am curious, from your perspective, what's a bad version of this? And again, it may be something that nobody knows anymore because we don't remember the bad ones. What's a bad version of this, where this actually went really badly and did not cause that connection to the character or whatever in the way that maybe they wanted? And what's a really good one? Either a game or a character that you remember, and these could come from your own experiences, just in games you played. Like, what's a good and a bad example of, like, see how this character was narratively cohesive, or maybe I should just say cohesive, and this one was not.
Okay. You know what? I'm gonna go into your MOBA space, actually.
Cool, hit it.
Yeah, and look at the Overwatch characters. People love them because they were given a little time to develop and a little time to show off their personalities, and the animation was in line with their personalities, and the voice was in line with the dialogue, was in line with the character shape, and all that stuff. And that's absolutely not the first place you go when you think of great character design and great and narrative to sustain, but that really helps sustain that game in a lot of ways, because these are characters people want to play, and not just because of their combat stats.
Yes. I would also say too, it's an interesting example because that cohesion helps them be something that someone wants to play, even if that person didn't know a ton about the lore of the game.
Exactly. And suddenly that world is available to people who aren't players. They can watch a YouTube video. Hey, that character's cool. Want to learn more about them. And so you expand your audience beyond just the game, and you can use narrative to attract that wider audience and to build upon it, and then bring that back into the game, and you have a positive feedback loop in many ways. And on the negative side, I'm trying to think of what I can say without getting in trouble. Well, I hate to kick a game when it's down, but I mean, one of the problems with Concord, I think, was that the characters felt, rather than they were organically grown from the creative collaboration to, okay, we need one of these, we need one of these, we need one of these, we need one of these. And I have no idea if that's true or not, and I certainly don't wish to denigrate the efforts of the team that worked on it, but it felt like it was prefab, and things were being added to check a box rather than who would be a cool character and how do we make them work together. And again, I'm so sad when that game failed. I wanted it to do well, but I didn't feel an emotional tug to it or any of the characters in it.
Right. I think that was a common feeling. I always hesitate on something like that because I'm like, I know a lot of people have objected to their character design. And I think, like, there might have been other things that were more there. That was not the only thing that went wrong with Concord, perhaps might be a way to say it. But again, that's the whole thing with games is if you're going to hit a home run in games, it's sort of like everything has to be an 11 out of 10 all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very difficult to do. And narrative is a part of that. And that's where you see something like Baldur's Gate 3 with pretty impressive character development, long stories and character arcs and all these different options and branching and all these, like, that is but if the game had sucked, it's not like narrative's going to carry it all by itself. The game had to be good enough, even though I would say that is relatively close to a narratively first game, or at least narrative on par in terms of driver.
I would argue that with Baldur's Gate 3, narrative gameplay is part of the core gameplay. Going through those dialogues, hearing those stories, building those relationships, character relationships, to build the player's story as they move through the space, that is functionally narrative gameplay. And so the narrative became a part of the core experience, the core gameplay experience, as well as just the player experience as well. And I think that's absolutely brilliant, and I admire it immensely.
Yeah. Okay, cool. No, I appreciate the giving examples of both. Okay, let me see where. So you've been doing this a minute.
I'm old, yes.
Not what I was saying. You've been doing this a minute though, and so you've watched some of these transitions. You said things have in some ways gotten better. You see less devs that don't understand narrative, and more that like understand being, oh, I understand how you interact with the game. I understand how I interact with you, and I see this as a beneficial thing versus a like, what are we doing? What are some of the big shifts that you've seen over the course of that time besides an increase in dev understanding of the narrative role?
Okay. When I started running my narrative roundtables at GDC in 2007 or so, we got the same complaints every roundtable, and we don't get invited in until the last minute. We don't have the tools we need. We don't get this. We don't get that. And all of those things that people were complaining about when I started that aspect of sort of building the game writer community, the narrative community, were standard practice by about 2015. And there was a lot of, oh God, I'm the only one on the team. And we started seeing writer teams. And we started seeing a little more investment in writing. And we started seeing writing-friendly features getting added. L.A. Noire, the first real good facial animations. Oh my God, that opened up so much to writers, because suddenly we could have somebody just have an expression as the reaction instead of saying, I am angry. And
right.
And all these incremental steps along the way have been picked up by writers and narrative designers and run with to unexpected places. But we are in a place now where people understand narrative has to be there at the very beginning to help create the framework for everything that's getting done. We are at a place where people understand that, yes, this is a real job by and large that requires real professionals to actually do the job. And this is a job that requires time and investment and feedback and things like that. And we didn't used to have that at all. And so all of that, I think, is good. We still have a long way to go. There's a reason I wrote the book I did last year, The Video Game Writer's Guide to Surviving an Industry That Hates You, because there are still a whole lot of systematic roadblocks to getting the best out of game writing at this point, some of which can be rectified with education, some of which can be rectified with better planning, whatever. But we are light years ahead of where we were when I started.
Based on the past, where we are today, and perhaps also this may be informed by the book that you wrote, what are those changes that move us into a better narrative future?
I think they are evolutionary rather than revolutionary.
Okay.
I think the better we integrate narrative with other disciplines, the better the games are going to be. The better we formalize narrative and writing as roles and provide career tracks for that and paths going forward, build a body of institutional knowledge, which really we still don't have a great one of, and pass it down and share it so that people come into the industry with that base knowledge instead of going, okay, this studio does things this way and the studio does things that way and never the twain shall meet. I think just the professionalization of it and the recognition of it, and which leads to the support of it, is what's going to get us more bang for the buck than anything else. And also, we're still learning how to write interactive stories. We've been doing this for a while, but we've been building the airplane while we've been flying it, in that, the technology keeps on changing, and, we're writing to designs that are half implemented and things like that. But as we get more mature, as the technology maybe stabilizes a little bit, as we can trust our tools and trust that we are in a stable space, we can then say, okay, this is how it works. Let's go crazy with experimenting and see what we can really do.
So I don't know how much you can speak to this, because I don't know how much other medium writing you've done in terms of like books or like you obviously had a book, but that's a different than anyway, movies and things like that. What is unique about the narrative designer or writer, like the narrative in the context of game development? What is like that special skill set, or the tweak versus what we might have classically considered writers or anything like that in other industries?
Okay, this might take a while. Okay, just to be clear before we go in, I have worked on over 130 tabletop role-playing game products.
Great.
I have published 9 novels, 2 short story collections, and a ton of other stuff. My first graphic novel is coming out next year.
Nice.
I have been all over the place in terms of writing. And
Fantastic.
I will,
okay, cool.
So speaking from my experience and from talking to folks in those fields, the big difference is interactivity. And if I am writing a linear narrative in a traditional form, such as books or comics or movies or TV, I control everything that happens. I control the pacing. I control the dialogue. I control who says what, whether the character succeeds or fails. I am in charge of all of it. And there we go. It's locked down. The person who partakes of that entertainment receives it. Video games, interactivity. Who is the hero of every video game? The player. I mean, you've played a million video games. Every time you've told a story to someone about what you did, the first word of that story was I. And it's not the character's name. It's I did this. And so you have to, as a writer in the video game space, take yourself out of the center and leave what I call the player-shaped hole. And the player steps into that, puts on the costume of the main character, whichever one they choose, and then it becomes theirs. And what I tell people is that as a game writer, I don't write the story. I write the narrative. I write all the pieces, the bits and bobs, the stage dressing, the scenery, the lights, the all the stuff that is there, sitting there waiting for the player to come along and interact with it and make it their story of their linear progression through the game. Even if it's not a linear game, their story through it moves linearly through time. They are making their unique story as they play and interact with the stuff that I have written and the stuff that everybody else has made as well. And so that is a huge, huge difference, because you get trained in linear media, to absolutely control everything down to the finest detail, to be precise. And you have to actively reject that to write games well. You have to write to the possibility of what the player might do and have it feel good no matter what they choose to do. And even in the railiest of all rail shooters, at any given moment, the player can advance. They can go back, they can go left, they go right, they can squat down, they can go prone, they can get up, they can reload, they can hide behind a rock and go off and have a sandwich and then come back. That's their story. Their moment-to-moment choices are unique. They're using the stuff that I help create in conjunction with the team, but the story gets made only when the player hits it. And so that is a huge fundamental difference. And I will say, for the record, I know folks in the linear media space who've tried to cross over into games and who were terrible game writers. And this is not because they are bad writers. This is not because they are bad people. It's because they were not good with that moment of interactivity. They could not step out of the center. At the core, it's who's in charge. Is it the writer who's in charge, or is it the player that's in charge?
You've been a narrative director. You've hired in narratives onto your team,
and
then had to train them. What are the traits you're looking for?
What I want is, one, the understanding they are writing for games, the ability to remove themselves, take their ego, and pull it out of the space and understand that they're writing for the player. Two, the understanding that they are not leading the train, that it's a collaborative space. A lot of what game writing does is absolutely reactive to what other departments have done and what other people need. And when things go wrong and stuff gets cut, the first line of defense and the last line of defense is often narrative, because, okay, we just chopped 2 levels out of the game. Narrative, please stitch up the story. I look for someone who is open to collaborating with people, both in the team and out of the team. And I'm looking for someone who can think out of the box. I don't want them just spitting back the basics at me. I want someone who says, what if? And maybe this is a bad idea, but the fact that they went there is interesting. And obviously you want writing skills, you want narrative skills, but I don't need you to be Shakespeare on day one. I need you to have a level of quality that I can train up. But if you have the best quality in the world, but you don't understand the other stuff and you never will understand the other stuff, it's a bad fit and you shouldn't be there.
Okay. So you've done narrative at that IC level. You've done narrative all the way up through that narrative director level. As you've interacted with leaders around narrative, because this is a podcast for leaders in game development, what would you have liked them to know as they interact with and make decisions around things that will impact all the disciplines, including narrative?
What I wish that they had known, and which I wish I'd done a better job of communicating for a portion of my career, is we are another discipline, and we need the resource and the collaboration and the support and the time, just like anybody else. We don't want more. We don't want special. Let us work the same way you work, and everybody wins.
So for you, it's please treat me like another dev.
Exactly. Yes. Because a lot of times you don't get that. There are folks who want to hide stuff from narrative for whatever reason. There are folks who want to take over the narrative because they don't trust the narrative professionals to do a better job of narrative than themselves. There are folks who simply forget narrative is there, frankly, and don't communicate. And there are folks who don't understand that, okay, if level design slips 2 weeks, that eats 2 weeks out of the writing time, and our back end's not moving because we've booked the studio, and you can't rebook the studio for another 6 months. And there needs to be awareness of our place in the production chain and provision in the production chain to let us do our jobs well. It's not just, and then the writer will do something, to quote the text game that somebody made a while back.
Right. It's funny, we haven't talked about voice recording, which is interesting because that is a pretty decent chunk of work. And I always thought it was interesting, even when I was there, like many studios just viewed the writer as the person who would go and then coach the actor. I think larger studios now sometimes have somebody who's specifically like the person who tries to get the best lines out of people, and the writer works with that person, and then that person's the one who sort of works with the voice acting talent. But for a long time there, it was just like, yep, you're the writer, so you wrote the lines, so you go guide the actor in trying to say them. And to your point, that is often quite an investment that is somewhere else and is very expensive. I still remember, late changes, and it was like, there's late changes we can accept, and there's late changes that literally like we can't do this because we don't have the actor anymore, or we're not going to be able to get them in time. Like, and that idea of like, you'll go figure it out, and it's like, I mean, there's actually rock solid hard constraints around this.
One of the things I say in the book actually is Dansky's first law of game writing is that words are always the cheapest fix until they're suddenly the most expensive. Because it's a lot easier. Okay, we've to have a rewrite early on in the process, then build another character model, build another mission space, things like that. But suddenly, once you've gone into the recording studio and someone wants to change a level, and that means changing half the scripts, well, how many weeks are you going to record, hire that studio back for? How many actors do you want to bring back in? Okay, hey, this line isn't landing, but we don't want to rent a studio and an actor for one line. And there's all that. I will say my experience by and large has been positive in the studio in that I have gone in with a voice director whose job was to talk to the talent and get the best performances. And my job as a writer there was, one, to provide context and understandings of the actors so they knew what the line meant so they give the best performance. Two, to give feedback through the director, because I was not to speak to the talent while they were in the booth, because the actors want one voice speaking to them, and I am all good with that. Mm-hmm. And three, to do rewrites on the fly as needed. If a line wasn't landing, there's no time and place to be precious. Okay, it's not landing. Let me write something that will land. And but yeah, I've been in situations where I have been frantically scribbling scripts while in the studio. I don't know if
you realize what didn't work about what you thought might work coming in.
Well, on one hand, I am, writing, okay, this actor is constantly bumping on this line. Why are they bumping on this line? Oh, there's an extra syllable here. I'm doing that. But at the same time, I'm getting messages from the home office. Hey, we finally finished the tutorial. As long as you're in the studio, can you record it tomorrow? By the way, you have to write it. And I'm not saying which game that was, but that was definitely a game.
And I think this is also speaking to that adaptability in the moment of just, okay, I guess you asked me to do something. And again, not being precious about it. Like, please treat me like another discipline, but also fairness to many of those leaders. Many of them treat all the disciplines that way. It's like, oh, could you please pull the rabbit out of your hat at the 11th hour so that this can all work? And being open to like, well, what can I pull out of the hat? How do I solve this right now? And just doing that through, again, that frame of words.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, the problem is not, hey, can you pull this out of your butt in the 11th hour? It's that, please don't think the 11th hour is the only hour.
Right.
And that's where it becomes a little problematic.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Writing is, in many ways, the most flexible of the disciplines. And as the most flexible of the disciplines, we can whip words up out of thin air pretty quickly. Something needs a fix. We can make it happen in a way that is faster and cheaper than I think really any other discipline. But that doesn't mean that we can always do it all the time, every time. And that is quality if we are constantly slapping layers of verbal duct tape on things. And part of learning this taught me honestly to speak producer. And I started because I would talk to producers about, hey, this is a really bad idea because we've got this character arc that pays off over here, and if we take out this NPC, then that's just outside of their experience. They don't understand why it's important. And again, that's not their fault, but I'm speaking fluent Martian to them when I'm trying to explain this stuff. And so I had to learn to speak producer and say, hey, if we go with this idea, we can do it, but here's what it's going to cost in terms of extra writing time. Plus, we're going to need 2 new cinematics, plus probably another bark thing over here. And here's what it's going to cost you. And if you want us to do it, we can do it. But here's 2 other solutions, and here's what they're going to cost. And maybe those other solutions are actually better narratively than the thing they got initially suggested. But again, framing narrative work in terms of a production schedule so it's understandable. And once you do that, once you build that relationship, then you can sort of start explaining it in terms of the creative side as well, and the artistic side, the player response side.
It's again, this is so much coming back in my mind to the idea of treat me like another discipline, because what you're describing is basically like any discipline that can figure out how to communicate to another discipline in the language that they speak is going to be more successful. And in your case, in the narrative case, it's just that with other pre-existing, like preconceived notions about the value or timing or whatever of this, it becomes more important for narratives to learn that lesson.
Yes.
Because they, otherwise it is too easy for everybody else just to think, oh, we'll just do it.
Exactly.
Like you were talking about the art director. Hey, you didn't give me a good copy. Instead of giving feedback, I'll just rewrite it. And two things are in that assumption. One, it's not worth it for me to give them feedback to rewrite it, so that's worth exploring. But two, do you actually think you can write better than the writer? And the answer is, in that moment, yes. Or at least perhaps based on all the other constraints in the environment, that is the most efficient way out of whatever my current problem is. And both of those are flawed assumptions.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. I mean, it's like somebody who doesn't like their meal at a restaurant saying, you know what, don't send this back to the kitchen. I'll just go back there myself. And,
right.
And you may be hell on wheels in your own house, and you may make a mean grilled cheese sandwich, but.
Yeah. No, I get, my analogy, just because you've walked through a lot of buildings doesn't mean you're an architect, right? Okay. Now I'm going to get in, we already mentioned Concord, so to make sure we complete Building Better Games bingo, we have to talk about LLMs for a second, because LLMs are new, and I'm sure there's some people out there that are going, I couldn't write before, but man, can I write now? Look at this thing. This thing will produce barks for me. It'll produce lines and lines of dialogue. It'll give me whole stories. I just feed in what I want and blah, 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 and I get this thing out. It's great. I bet maybe I don't need narrative now or whatever, right? I don't know if you've encountered this or seen this in the space. What do you see as the impact of LLMs on the narrative discipline?
Okay, let me start by saying this. If you couldn't write before and you have an LLM, you still can't write. Okay, you're not writing if you're using an LLM. You are getting a deliverable that is made of words, but that's not writing, and you didn't do it. Okay. I am fundamentally against the use of LLMs on numerous levels, but let me stick simply to the craft one here, which is that creative work is done additively. Every brushstroke, every word, every line of code is built on the one that came before. And the thing you have created up to that point informs what you do next. And there is a process of discovery, of going forward and going back, that only comes from that step-by-step creation. It is the additive experience distilled into something, whereas an LLM does not do that. An LLM plops out the thing, and it is looking for an optimal solution. And there is no optimal solution in a lot of this stuff. There are possible solutions, and you see which one works best. And so I think using LLMs is bad craft. I think it yields inferior results. And frankly, I think even if you use it, you're probably still going to have to get someone to go back and look at it and make sure that your barks aren't all woogie, woogie, woogie.
Right.
And so I am fundamentally against it on numerous levels. And I know people think, hey, it makes it easier, it's faster, whatever. I'm gonna say something heretical here. If you're looking to cut costs on a game dev team and your first target is the writing staff, you don't understand that some numbers are bigger than others.
Nobody got into this field to make money, right?
You can make literally dozens of dollars.
Dozens of dollars.
And this is going to make a whole lot of AI stands angry with me, but
no.
I don't care. They're already angry with me. I'm going to say this. As an individual, as a writer, I have a unique set of experience and knowledge and reference that I can bring to bear on a problem. And I have been places and I have seen things and I've had conversations, and I can make unique connections from those that I can then pull together and make the game from, that an LLM cannot, because it has not been the places I have been. It has not experienced the things I've been. It's not going to have that wild spark of, hey, I'm writing Far Cry, but let's talk about a guy at the Jersey Shore now because, hey, there's sand. And I wrote a couple of NPCs in the original Far Cry about sand, and those guys lived on in infamy forever. And that's not something that would have come out of an optimal solution.
Right.
And so I don't think the craft is there, and I much prefer human creativity. and where it can go that's not the optimum solution, but might be a better solution.
Yeah. You have not seen it be in any way effective or anything like that in those spaces.
I have not seen it be effective, and I have seen it being actively detrimental,
Yeah.
where you have people offloading their creativity to a prompt and they become dependent on that prompt rather than having, trusting their own creativity, and that, cognitive deficit, I think they call that.
Yeah.
That person is now tied to that LLM. And I don't want to work with someone who can't function on their own, can't think on their feet, can't, if we're in a crisis situation where they can't reach for the LLM, they don't have the capacity to come up with their own thing anymore.
Okay, we're coming up on the end of time here. Anything else, looking at this whole sweep, right? From misunderstandings to what is the narrative discipline to how leaders relate, like anything else you feel like you want to say or that we should say to leaders in game dev related to the narrative discipline?
I guess what I would say is we are here. We are good at our jobs. We want to work with everyone else. Please let us make the games better with you. And trust us when we say this might be a problem down the road. Believe us that we're not saying it because we just want to be in charge of things. Understand that we want to be part of the collective effort making this thing better, and we want you to engage with us so that we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain things that come with the narrative perspective that I think are in many ways unique, in that narrative tends to look at the whole game's narrative structure and sees how the thing you tweak in mission 2 affects mission 8. And so if we raise that point, we're not just saying it to be precious. We're saying, hey, this is something that's going to come back and bite us in 2 months when we're building that next level or things like that. So trust our expertise. Let us do good work for you.
Not everybody is going to be as experienced as Richard and will be able to lay out all those paths and have the curiosity when someone says, I don't think that'll work, or this isn't a good idea, to ask questions about why if they aren't able to speak your language yet. Maybe that's not a skill they've developed at this point in their career. And it doesn't mean that their point isn't valid and that they're not an expert. They might not know how to talk to you in the way that you understand. And so you're going to have to try to understand them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I have to listen. Everybody has to listen. And this is something that I learned to do very early in my career, because the more information I have, the better I can do my job. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I have always rallied my narrative teams to reach out, to do internal PR with other disciplines, show them what we were doing so they could get excited about it and they could learn our language a little bit. Mm-hmm. But just to sort of sum up, this is why I write the things on LinkedIn twice a week. This is why I wrote the book on being a game writer. This is why I'm writing a book on game narrative now. This is why I've done all the conferences and, the student competition. I realize that in some ways I'm, for lack of a better way of putting it, kind of a pioneer in thinking about this stuff in this way. And I don't think it's because I'm super special, but just because we are still pushing the frontiers back. We're still establishing this stuff. And so I view it as my responsibility to the craft and the community to then turn around and share all of that with everybody who's coming up behind me, with my peers and successors and the folks who haven't even started thinking about games yet, to give them what I have learned so they can pick it up and do better with it and come up with their own variations on it and build on it. And if I can write a book that has a chapter on how to build a good feedback loop, and someone else can read that book and take that to their producer and their lead, even if they hadn't figured out how to do that themselves, they might have known the need, and I just gave them the tools to do it. Mm-hmm. And that is what matters. And then they can carry those tools forward into their career.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Very aligned. Very aligned. You just mentioned a few things. I think you said LinkedIn. You've got a book that's out. You're working on another one. Anything else you want to send people towards?
I also have a Patreon where I natter about game dev occasionally, and also baseball and Bigfoot.
Perfect. And then, what in game dev is the thing you are most proud of having done?
The two titles I'm most proud of, and I can't narrow it down to just one. One, Splinter Cell Conviction, which was just a wild roller coaster of a ride, and we had no time, and our hair was collectively on fire, and we made a story that at the time people maybe didn't quite vibe with, but in the intervening years, people have understood what we were trying to do and gone, oh. And it's a multiply nested narrative. It is based on deep character motivation, people doing terrible things for what they think are the best reasons in the world. And I'm really proud of the story structure, and I'm really proud of the writing in that one. And, people have quoted some of the lines I wrote to me, so that warms my heart. And then on the flip side, something called the Orpheus device, which I did for Earplay, which was an audio-only game. And you did it through the Alexa, and you responded to voice prompts. And that was based on a tabletop property that I'd worked on, and it was a horror game, a ghost story, basically. And I got to go absolutely bananas with the writing in a way that I can't do in a video game, because the writing was all there was there. And I had people telling me that they were completely freaked out and terrified at the end of it. So, two ends of the spectrum.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, but I'm glad I had that breadth of experience.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Okay. All right. I think we'll wrap it up there unless you got anything else you want to say.
No, just thank you so much for having me on, and I hope people find what I had to say amusing, interesting, and possibly, sufficient reason to go learn more about Bigfoot.
Perfect. Okay. Well, so yeah, definitely check out the Patreon if you're interested in Bigfoot. That sounds, everybody is to some degree. So, I love it. All right. Thank you, Richard, so much. I appreciate your time. If you like this episode, go ahead and subscribe. We talk about things that are going on in game dev, related to leadership. So cheers.